So tonight's book is Homeland Elegies by Akhtar. This was actually our first book that we selected as an
That's
official
right.
pick for January. Although we did read some other books too, but this was our
Quite a
official
few,
choice.
yes.
I don't think we've yet commented on book covers, but this one to me was stand
Beautiful.
out. I love that cover.
And you
I've
see
got
the
a thing about
sheen.
gold foil, but I love the tree. I love what it symbolizes. I think it's a really, really beautiful cover.
It's amazing. It's written by a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. And this book had me so confused for the first 50 pages because I thought it was completely non-fiction, and I found it disconcerting and gratuitous and intrusive. And then I looked online and I saw that there were a number of reviews ruminating on what to call it, because it's part memoir, part fiction, part novel, part essay. So it is
What did you say before? Was it auto fiction?
fiction. That's what they called it. I don't know what that means. Auto fiction. It is it's just a synthesis of parts of his life, which kept me guessing. I was like, is this you, or is this fictional?
Yeah, no, I think that I can appreciate why that is somewhat disconcerting. I have to say that I've read other books where I've found it puts me off when I can't quite work out what the genre is.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I didn't feel that this time. I kind of went with it, and I'm not sure if it was maybe because we'd talked before and you had said that, and then I sort of expected it, I guess. But it is an interesting point, because I've not read many like this where
No.
really the difference between fiction and non-fiction, it's so hard to pull it out, I would say. I think really, I mean, the story, the life, I'm not sure what we're going to call it, but this is really the story about being the other, where you're from, identity. Ayad Akhtar in the book is very much, he's an American, but he is born in America, but his family come from Pakistan. And it's all about, particularly post 9/11, I think is obviously a crucial point in this book, and how he's treated on that particular day. And it evolves into a real, it's not a thesis, that makes it sound far more
It
academic
felt
than
like
it
a
is.
thesis, but it felt like a thesis at times. So
In some
I think
parts,
you're
yes,
right.
on identity and what it feels like, as I said, to be the other. To be, for him, he's American, but people are always asking him, where are you from? And that's really quite profound to think that, where am I from?
It begins with an overture to America. I think the first page is one long sentence, which is quite indicative of the way that he writes. There's a lot of very complicated and superfluous to me. I mean, I loved the book, but I found that it was very, very detail orientated, and also just very heavy at points. I thought that it could have been condensed, but it begins where he is happy to be American. He's almost fighting against his father's rigid belief, his mother's rigid belief that, remember where you're from and we're not really American, whereas his father embraces American culture and wants to fit in totally and completely.
I love that difference between the parents.
Yes, I agree. It really exposes the nuanced differences that people have
within their own family, immediate family unit, I think.
Yeah,
I have to say, there were points in this. I mean, I folded so many pages because I thought the author's writing, his turn of phrase, there were some moments that were so brilliant. I noted down a couple of quotes that I just thought what really made me think. One, you've got the book, so I can't sadly recite it.
Sorry, everyone.
But it was how the established majority takes its we image from a minority of its best and shapes a they image of the despised outsiders from the minority of their worst. So it's this idea that, how it's built up, who the strong majority are versus the weak minority, and how that's done, how that's actually almost like deliberately crafted to keep the outsiders at bay within a society which we know is not really unified in any way at all.
That quote is from a person who fled the Holocaust.
Yes, exactly, you're right. And a man called Norbert Elias, and that's quite fitting given that it was Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday. But he was a German Jew who left Germany in 1933, and the point was he was obviously able to see what was happening there, and almost, I mean, able to see what was going to happen.
Have that presence.
And left when he did, luckily.
Well, Einstein said, if my theories are proved correct, the Germans will call me a German and the French will call me European. If my theories are disproved, the French will call me German and the Germans will call me a Jew. And I found that I found that kind of feeling is really what encapsulates this book. His father is a doctor, and there's a court case at the end which really exposes the anti-immigrant emotions that run through. He's told to kind of portray himself as American as possible, and then the other side's lawyers like, don't you need to go to Muslim prayers to kind of highlight that he is Muslim, and how that interacts with the different things that are going on politically. And I find that astounding that he made the character of his father adore Donald Trump right until the end, even though he was, you know, the rhetoric that was coming from him was really quite offensive, and he talks about that. He just was desperate to belong, and that was what this book was for me. It was about trying to belong and looking at who you are and your identity. And there were 8 sections to this book. Each ended with an epiphany, and sometimes they were positive, sometimes they were negative. And I think one reviewer that I saw said that this called to mind James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and that concept of constant self-reflection. And I think that's what this book is. He has a professor that he really, really adores, that, you know, he almost goes back to teachings throughout, and it's about what it means to be American and what it means to be the other in America, and what America actually is. I think he says the US began as a colony, and that is what it remains. And, you know, enrichment is its sole purpose. We pray to the gods of finance, and that is also another, because money has a real part to this book.
Yeah, sometimes money and consumerism, and actually there's a whole discussion how he makes some money because of a concept that he has. But he also talks a lot about it, and how, you know, are we just consumers in this world? Is that all it's about? And one thing that I found really, I mean, fascinating and awful was how it goes into this in a lot of detail, but basically how blacks were actually completely excluded from the economic system under a guise of it being liberal, but actually they were completely penalized. So no black man, woman was able to succeed economically, but it was like this complete facade that, oh, you know, we're doing things to make everything kind of more equal, more liberal, but it was actually a load of rubbish.
That is it pinpoints a society that is being ruined by debt. And how they deal with that, and the emotions that and the issues that causes. The most poignant scene for me was him walking the streets of New York, moments after the towers have fallen, and how he buys a rosary because he is so totally petrified to be identified as someone that could possibly condone. And I know that he wrote a play before this book, Ayad Akhtar, which explores further the position of Muslim Americans post 9/11 and how they felt when Pakistan was thrust into the spotlight, and what that did for their identities. And I thought this was at times a really thought-provoking and incredibly compelling book. One
thing that really stuck with me was Ayad Akhtar talking about, I believe it was his uncle, and his uncle's name was a name that nobody could pronounce in America. So he ended up being called Alan, Like, it was just, and you really, you know, that's someone's name, you know, the name they are given at birth, and they almost just have to become someone else to fit in. So he just went by that name because it was easier for those around him.
Yeah,
you know, that really did.
A highly recommended read.
It'll make you think, for sure.
Definitely.